is how do you actually deliver change? I mean, sustainability is all about delivering impact. So how do you genuinely get technology to enable change and therefore get us to impact? There's a whole system change that needs to happen, and that requires quite deep collaboration across many different parties. To be able to get back on track, then we have to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. That's starting to become quite real, I think, in terms of some of the choices that our clients and business leaders are making. So they're balancing what their impact is versus some of the financial metrics as well.
Hi, my name is John. You're joining the Experience Cafe, and today we're going to be talking about sustainability. And I'm here today with Phil Spring. Phil, you're one of our sustainability leaders.
Yes.
Here in IBM, working globally on our, what we're doing with clients, and you've been working in this space a long time.
Yeah.
You want to give a quick intro around who you are and some of the experiences that you had looking to share?
Yeah, sure. So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I've got a few roles, as people will probably know who know me know. But the key one for this conversation is being part of the global sustainability practice, having shaped and led the offerings around the energy transition, which means that really my client scope is all about energy, and I run energy utilities across Europe as well.
Great. And so I'm looking forward to a super discussion. Maybe just a little bit more about you personally. Can you tell me two truths and a lie about yourself, and I'll try and guess which one's the lie.
Well, I mean, it may surprise you to know that I'm at the sort of the introverted end of things when it comes to kind of me as an individual. So, and sustainability, a lot of it is about, in this stage, is about communication and being out there, and especially kind of building the IBM brand in this space as well. So I've done a ton of talks recently. So starting with being in front of 1,000 people in COP26, almost 1,000 people in Tech UK the other week, and also following on from Alok Sharma at a recent Reuters conference as well. So you pick out your truths and your lies.
Wow. So those are all pretty big statements. I'm going to go with, were you with Alok Sharma?
Alok Sharma, yeah. I was.
So which one's the lie?
It's the 1,000 people at COP26.
Okay.
So I did I ran a round table at COP26 as part of one of the fringe events. It was the Resilience Hub that we were involved in.
So sustainability, I guess we've all just personally experienced, a number of a heat wave recently over the summer.
Yeah.
We've seen floods. Extreme weather events are becoming much more than normal. And it's almost like are we facing the apocalypse?
Yeah.
In terms of you're close to this, how much time have we actually got left to actually do something and affect change?
Yeah, well, some people will say we haven't got any time left. If you look at sustainability from the lens of climate, and don't forget sustainability is about all planetary resources, it's not just about climate, but reaching the Paris goal of 1.5 degrees by 2050, if you think about the carbon budget that we have left to be able to get there, then if we continue to spend that carbon budget at the rate that we're spending it today, then we're going to spend it in 9 years, less than 9 years. To be able to get back on track, then we have to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. What do you do about it? Because what you're doing, and this is not just about climate, but you are changing a whole system. There's a whole system change that needs to happen, and that requires quite deep collaboration across many different parties. So the solutions are complicated. So there's a lot of writing about the where carbon needs to be reduced, but actually the practicality of how you do that was a bit missing. So that's kind of how I got into that. And I mean, it plays very nicely into what we do in IBM as we're positioning ourselves as sustainability technologists. So we're all about making change happen, about applied sustainability, not about a bit about counting it, but it's about technology that enables change to happen.
So not much time left, complex change to make. Before we get into some of the how, I'm just curious in terms of, will this be accelerated through changing consumer behavior or through legislation? What's going to be the biggest driver? Or just pure, moral obligation through business leadership, which I'm doubtful about personally. But
Yeah. It's going to be a combination of all of those things, because you need the policy frameworks to actually enable incentive investments and regulation, sort of carrot and stick, to actually make things happen. And most of the developed economies have committed to their net zero targets, so that's being put in place. You do need consumers to realise how they need to personally change what they do, but business has a huge role to play in actually enabling that change to happen and providing the choices that allow consumers to choose the low carbon and the sustainable choice, and to do it in a way that people talk about the fair and just transition. So, how do you divide the costs amongst different segments of the population around different countries? So, there's an obligation across business and government to find what those solutions are that actually make it happen. But every industry will decarbonise in a slightly different way. It's unique to every industry, so it has to become very specific to a business and their clients.
So you almost need the legal frameworks to support investments and change. You need to be able to educate the consumers around the choices that they're making for better. And then, to your point, in business, there needs to almost be an incentive to make that shift, both either from a compliance perspective, legally, but ideally, hopefully, it's an opportunity, right?
It is, which is why people talk about the quadruple bottom line now, and thinking about balancing planet and purpose and profit, and that's starting to become quite real, I think, in terms of some of the choices that our clients and business leaders are making this. So they're balancing what their impact is versus some of the financial metrics as well.
And so in terms of have you got some good examples around clients that are sort of making this transition, that are kind of getting it right? What are sort of some of the successes that you can share? And talk about.
Well, our most recent CEO survey, the 25th survey, I think it is, was focused on sustainability. And what that was trying to do is find a link between those businesses performing well when it comes to sustainability and a link to business performance. And they call those businesses transformational sustainability businesses. Basically, the characteristics of a business that is using sustainability as a transformational lever, as opposed to trying to discover sustastainability or being compliant or operationalizing it. It's how do you get to a transformational state? And they identified 13% of businesses that were doing that, and there is a link between those businesses and their business performance, either revenue growth or EBIT. So, and that's kind of well proven in other surveys as well. And the sorts of things that were identified as being important were a lot was about people. So about strong leadership, about making it visible across the organisation, about not doing it in silos, about skilling, and of course about technology as well.
Sounds like a hook you've just given me there. So talk to us about some of the solutions and things that you're driving in your space with clients to help crack this problem.
There are all sorts of applications where technology is pretty essential to driving change. A big part of it is around enabling ecosystems, so about enabling collaboration. And of course, you then start to talk about technologies like blockchain, and which allows you to do things like certification, run a distributed network of trust. But it's all of the exponential technologies, so whether it's AI, machine learning, it's IoT, that need to come together in a particular way to actually make the application happen. So, I mean, more often now we're talking about, well, what does the solution do? What does it enable? A few years ago, I think we led on the blockchain idea. Blockchain was going to change everything. So it has a part to play, but it's not everything. It has to be the combination of those technologies. And then you have to get the business case right around it for all the individuals participating in that ecosystem. And then you have to make it work as well, sort of drive volume through these marketplaces, whether or not you're trying to connect buildings or if it's to do with provenance in the mining or the rare earth metals supply chain, it's all those things need to work.
So maybe just to take a step back there from the technology, in terms of the business, the core business problem that those things are solving, I guess in the energy space, we talk about as you shift from being more fossil fuel based to renewables, I guess it's the predictability of those renewables, which is the main issue, and providing storage and kind of balancing the grid and the demand versus the supply is like a fundamental challenge, right?
Yeah. It's partly those things. I think again, there's a lot for people to learn around what getting to a low carbon economy is all about, because there's a transition obviously that we're making to net zero, and that goes with the word. There's a journey we're going on, but part of it is about electrification, fine, about heat and transport and so on, and there'll be a big increase in terms of how much energy we consume from the grids. There are implications for the grids, as you say, because you've got renewables on the grid which are more intermittent. You need to deal with that. There are new markets that are being created in order to incentivize organizations to provide flexible demand. But there's also maybe almost half of your final energy demand that won't come from electricity. It has to come from other sources. And we're thinking things like hydrogen, synthetic fuels, and then obviously the negative side is the carbon capture as well. So there's actually a huge change that takes us all the way to that, and each industry is going to have its own path when it comes to their transition and how they use those fuels. And
then so to play back to then, I guess things like blockchain help to understand the sourcing of all these different things and how you automate the transactions that need to happen between those different sources.
Or making some of the money flow, as it were, so allowing organizations to tap into certain markets they couldn't tap into before, or creating secondary markets around certificates and so on. So, I mean, there has to be a purpose that these things enable, and we need to get the money flowing between the participants to actually kind of fuel some of this change to happen.
And where are we on that so far? Because you've done some trials in some of the markets, setting up some of these marketplaces and these ecosystems. What can you kind of share with us on some of those?
Well, the one that we talk about a lot is the one that the team in Denmark have set up in IBM. So this is with Copenhagen City, and they've done an amazing job over quite some years actually in building a business case with the city, and then creating the ecosystem, which is not just the energy companies, but also the providers of that flexible load. At the moment, it's mostly buildings, and they've actually started to see this market be in operation now, to actually start to get flexible loads and see some of the returns from those markets. And there's a very nice video that's going to be released fairly shortly on that everybody will have to have a look at.
We'll have to hyperlink it to this. And then I guess in terms of that's an example of where we've actually, we've helped enable that marketplace to make that shift.
Yes.
To be able to trade that energy amongst the different participants to optimize and make that shift. What are some of the other emerging solutions to help accelerate this change? You mentioned we got 9 years just to stay neutral.
Well, when we think about our role in technology that enables the energy transition, we've got 7 areas that we're thinking of. One is flexible energy, which we talked about. There are others such as data fabrics around hydrogen, new fuels, around e-mobility, thinking about net zero customers, thinking about how you balance net zero grids, about how you deal with resilience in the grid as well, because you're trying to run some of these assets in an era when actually the climate is changing, so you're having to deal with and adapt to some of these weather events as well. So 7 areas we work in, and it's a whole variety of different technologies that are used in those situations.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, you've got the incumbent industries, which are kind of anchored to the carbon economy, versus you've got new entrants and other people. In terms of, as you make the transition, do you see any particular winner, or do you think people can make the shift? Or do you think certain industries will just become redundant?
Well, I think the people always talk about the challenge for the oil companies to kind of pivot away from hydrocarbons to a sort of new energy economy. But they've got an essential role to play when it comes to the energy transition. And if you think about some of the European companies, they're very committed to that change happening and going through massive transformation to make that work. And they have some of the funding available in the investment to actually make these things happen. You can see that happening in e-mobility, for example. But there likely will always be a need for hydrocarbons, not in terms of fuels that you burn, but in thinking about things like lubricants, coolants, and so on. So they do have a role, but in a different shape in the future. And those organisations know that, and they're making progress in terms of their transformation.
Fantastic. Great. So if you like what you're hearing so far, please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to find out more. And as we transition to that, Phil, let me ask you a quick couple of questions to get a bit more insights around you. So it's a sort of an A or B type answer. Morning or evening?
Morning.
Diet or exercise?
Diet.
You have to think about that. Email or chat?
Chat.
Yes or perhaps?
Perhaps.
Consumer Electronics Show or Wimbledon?
Probably Wimbledon.
We have to think about that. Distribution or transformation?
Distribution or transformation?
Or sorry, to say distribution, I meant disruption or transformation.
Disruption.
Cloud or GDPR?
Cloud.
Video or phone?
Phone.
Consult or direct?
Consult.
Speed or accuracy?
Speed.
Excellent. So in terms of the work that you've been doing, we find we all learn from our failures, and that helps us to inform how we drive some more of our successes. In your experience, what's one of the most significant failures that you've learned from to be able to apply that you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thinking about the role of technology and sustainability, one of the things that I've been thinking about quite carefully is how do you actually deliver change? I mean, sustainability is all about delivering impact. So how do you genuinely get technology to enable change and therefore get us to impact? And having the benefit of being around a little while and seeing quite a few projects, there's a few projects where you think, actually, this didn't go that well. And there's a lot of the classic things that you see there in terms of some of the issues, mostly not about technology, but how the change is realized and embedded in an organization, dealing with some of the politics, dealing with some of the, some of how you go about actually delivering on the change, the scope, and so on. So, and a lot of the same issues kind of keep occurring in terms of all the projects that you see. So how do you actually deal with some of that in this need for urgency to be able to actually get to impact? We have to get some of these things right in order to actually make change happen, and make them happen quickly as well. So it's the technology side is almost the easy part, but everything around it, whether it's to do with people, stakeholders, some of the regulation, the contracts, and so on, they can really, really hold you back. So how do you anticipate all of those things to make a complete change program or transformation in order to actually be able to deliver the impact?
And is there any silver bullets in doing that? Because to your point, I think the technology is there, right? It's never really a technology problem, or very rarely. To your point, when things fail, and it sounds like you've had some personal experiences on the change front. How do you orchestrate that change? Is there any, are there any magic bullets or techniques that you've discovered?
I wouldn't say there are any magic bullets. I mean, if you've got some, then let me know. I'd love to learn. But we focus on the technology. Obviously, that's something we're kind of really interested in. That's our game.
Yeah.
But actually, in the end, it's going to be all about the people, isn't it? And especially the leaders that we engage with to help them understand what it will take to make the implementation of these solutions successful and deliver impact. So there's a bit of an obligation, isn't there, for us to look for those sorts of issues and to help to sort those out, because typically that's where they come from.
And I guess if we can everyone has a vested interest in making it a success.
Yes.
And kind of bring everyone along around those different stakeholder groups aligned to a common goal and outcome to help drive it. I mean, just on that point, one of the things to do that is transparency in reporting, to understand where you are, what's the gap you need to close, and how do you drive that closure of that gap. And one of the things that's been quite topical, which I'm interested in your opinion on, is ESG reporting.
Yes.
And the classic one that's made the headlines is Shell, as a traditional oil company, is kind of right up there in terms of ESG rating, and a company like Tesla, which is doing a lot, is not even in the rankings, or doesn't get a good score. What's your opinion on that? I guess specifically on ESG and then reporting more generally.
Well, I mean, there's many ways in which organisations are reporting on ESG, all sorts of disclosures and ratings and so on. And I mean, the financial sector has a real voracious appetite for that data, because they see a link between, that and future performance and for their investments. And indeed, they're pushing on the boundaries of not just emissions and carbon, but also, nature-based disclosure, a bit more focus on the social side, the S in ESG, as well as the transition plans and what does it take to actually move these companies. But so I think it depends upon the, what you're reporting, the ESG rating and so on. There are some very well-known ratings, not agencies, but parties such as CDP who do that. And their whole purpose is to really enable a company to think about the change that they need to deliver. So it's not necessarily in the rating itself, although that is used. It's getting an organisation to think about what they need to do to make the transition. I think, and that's the key, isn't it? How do you use that data in order to actually deliver that change? And those two organisations will be thinking about those issues in quite different ways. But you don't just report and that's it and you're done. The whole purpose is that you're going to enable a baseline for change.
And so, take what you're saying there, it boils down to what's the metrics that you're trying to measure for change. So, in the ESG example, I guess it's a broader set of things that people are looking at, which is maybe, explains why, one company that's supposedly, very carbon intensive, or is carbon intensive, versus another has done quite well.
Yeah.
And drives that change. And I guess so. You just touched another topic there that says, so financial institutions are one of the catalysts potentially for change in addition to that legal environment.
Yeah.
How are you, and reporting kind of informs their investment decisions and some of the due diligence and covenants that they're trying to drive around those investments. Are you seeing a lot of activity in this space, and is there sort of some standards emerging, or so that everyone's got a common baseline? Vis-a-vis this ESG debacle has been debated.
No, there are certainly many standards emerging, whether or not it's some of the EU standards or thinking about the SEC in the US as well. And they're becoming, you have organisations that have to comply with these. So there's a whole load of work that needs to be done to actually implement some of the changes needed in order to be able to kind of report on these metrics to eventually to the same quality as financial reporting as well, and financial disclosures, and it's a good thing. That's the way things are moving. But they cover certain areas. There's controversial issues such as, do you report on scope 1, 2, and 3? How do you do that? How do you influence your supply chain? How do you get the data from your supply chain? How do you then position yourselves if you're part of the science-based targets, the SBTI, and so on? So there's many things to think about for organisation when they report in this space. But the standards are emerging, the taxonomy is emerging as well. And I mean, a lot of it's been established for many years actually, and we've been doing environmental reporting for many years. But the whole level of the standards is increasing pretty rapidly.
And I guess, where are we in going back to your 9 years kind of time frame, where do you think we are now in the journey to transition, and where do you think we will be in 5 years' time, in terms of progress, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, It varies quite a lot by country. I think, for us in the UK, we'd say, well, we've been on this path for a little while now, and indeed, when you think about build of renewables and moving towards low carbon power supply, then actually making pretty okay progress. But then when we look at some of the other things we talked about that are needed around electrification of transport and heat and insulation of people's homes, there's quite a lot more to do still. And yes, the policies emerging, seeing businesses being set up in this space, and it's not going to be an easy transition. It feels as if we're not moving quickly enough. So fine for the UK. Western economies, they have their own plans as well. Great that we got more likely to see US and China on board. But it's a worldwide issue, and it impacts different countries in different ways. So in Africa, it'll be all about energy access, as opposed to kind of what we see in the UK in terms of the whole energy transition. So it's massively variable, and I'm not sure I can predict where we'll be in 5 years at
okay,
all.
maybe if I approach it another way, so the whole Russia-Ukraine thing is throwing a huge, spanner in the works in terms of suddenly energy supply becomes a very real issue, right? And I know you've looked into this in terms of Europe. How is that changing the view? Has it set us back because now people can't produce hydrocarbons fast enough because there's not enough of them being supplied to key markets?
Yeah.
Or does it act as a catalyst and accelerant to transition to renewables? What's your view? What are you seeing?
Well, I think, and I hope that it will be an acceleration. So some clients I've spoken talk about a doubling of the rate of change that's needed. But certainly in the very short term, there's some quite tricky issues to deal with in terms of removing dependence upon hydrocarbons from Russia, that they really vary by country in terms of what needs to happen. So the situation in Germany, for example, is very different to the situation in UK, but it's galvanizing those countries to act and make change happen. And I think the big challenge is then, how do you make it happen quickly? Because typically you're talking about the build of some actually quite big infrastructure projects that have got long lead times. So how do you accelerate all of that? And coming back to this question about collaboration, that's what's needed fundamentally. So how do you properly plan across all the supply chains, all organizations that are involved in actually implementing it? How do you deal with that in a time where skills and workforce is squeezed as well? And how do you make it cost effective? So there are some big issues around collaboration. So I think most countries understand what needs to be done, but then how do you actually make it happen, I think, is the issue.
And what's the biggest constraint in your mind? That's because the different range of options have been available. That you got microgeneration nuclear micro reactors for nuclear. You got wind. You got solar. You got all these different things.
Yeah.
But no one seems to be kind of pushing it. Before, the argument was the marginal cost of production or capital costs are too prohibitive. But those things seem to have kind of come forward now, where it's marginal cost is kind of quite competitive.
For renewables, yes. Yeah, absolutely. But you kind of need to look at the whole mix, and what comes with renewables is intermittency. So what's the cost of dealing with that intermittency, either through demand response or through alternative sources of energy, or curtailing wind farms. But and then that's the idea of small modular reactors as well in the nuclear space, that cheaper and quicker and more predictable to implement. So I think that's there are examples of where sort of innovation is hopefully going to start to drive down the costs. But when you're staring at the price tag for building a big nuclear power station, that's a tough decision to make.
Fantastic, great. Thanks all. It's been great to talk to you today. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.